Lukács, who is service line leader for sustainability and climate change at Deloitte, Hungary. Hello, Ákos. We have Professor László Pintér, who is head of department at the Environmental Sciences and Policy Department of the Central European University. Hello, László. And we have Maria Skóra, who is head of program for international dialogue at the Progressive Zentrum of Berlin.
Hi.
So,
thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming. So allow me to introduce this series very quickly. We've already had 3 conversations with our speakers individually. You can check out these conversations on YouTube. They were very, very interesting. And today we would like to have a last debate where we sort of sum up what was going on in the previous conversations, but also the goal is to explore some of the trade-offs, controversies, or costs associated with going green. And I would kindly ask my audience's help, because we've prepared our questions, but of course we couldn't exhaust every topic and all points of view. So I would kindly ask our audience to use the chat room to ask any question that comes into your mind. I will keep my eye on the chat box and we'll try to entertain as many of them as possible. Now, if you have a very urgent question, then you can raise your hand digitally, that is. And if you raise your hand, I will try to give the word to you and you can ask personally the question to our speakers. I would encourage you to use this option as well. Let's try to make use of our digital options as much as we can. So let's begin our conversation. So I think one of the most interesting things about the coronavirus crisis was that we could see this sort of trade-off at play between the socioeconomic sphere and sustainability. So as the economy stopped working, we saw that there was massive unemployment in the European Union and in the United States, and I would assume everywhere in the world. Poverty increased, but we also saw that the planet could breathe again. There were so many memes and interesting writings about this. So let's explore a little bit this trade-off. Maria, I would like to begin with you. What do you think? How can we resolve this trade-off? How can we start again after coronavirus so that we have both an equitable and a sustainable society?
Well, that's a $1 million question, to be honest, and I don't think we have an answer to it. But in fact, as dire the situation is, and as a big challenge it is to cope with COVID-19 and the outbreak of coronavirus, we could and should be looking at this crisis as a catalyst for change, as a moment zero, so to speak, a moment of opportunity to acknowledge mistakes, look back and see it as a moment as a chance to change the ways we behave, we consume, we produce, how our societies function. And I think you're very right in pointing out how many socio-economic, social, political consequences this health emergency has brought. It exposed weaknesses, structural weaknesses, or systemic weaknesses of our societies. Well, understandably, it had severe economic consequences with lockdowns, with slowdown of economy. And at the end of the day, only strong states with strong institutions and rich states, last but not least, are in the position to cushion these effects. And here we also can see the added value of the European Union and coming in solidarity and facing a challenge like this. We know already now that the EU has been developing ideas and plans how to respond to this very sudden socioeconomic downturn. So perhaps one way, to answer your question, perhaps one answer would be more EU and more coordinated action, more international cooperation, and not only thinking at the national level, not inward and inert thinking. And secondly, I know that there are many articles or reflections, and some thinkers um, suggest that the world after COVID will be completely different than the world that we know now. And I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if this shock and these shock waves that we are experiencing now, if they are strong enough to change the ways that we've lived before, the lifestyles and the production chains in a sustainable way for the future. Since you're asking about the trade-offs between well, economic gains and profit and more sustainable way of life, that has been an unsolved problem so far, because sustainability costs and sometimes stands in an opposition to economic profit. So it's more less an economic question, I guess. It's more a question about the values and that we would want to follow, or I say certain political decisions that we would want to implement, which perhaps won't be beneficial now, but would save us or future generation from an economic catastrophe. So I'll leave it here and leave some space for other thoughts of the other invited
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would like to give the word to László now. Maria mentioned a lot of interesting points, but I would like to raise two that I found particularly interesting. The one about the European Union, and the one where she said that she doesn't feel like everything is going to change after this crisis, and how it is an opportunity, but it's not necessarily true that everything is going to change. László, what are your thoughts? What's the EU's role? Are we promoting change? Are we going forward during this crisis? I would ask our hosts to unmute László. Excuse us for the technical problems. It was bound to happen sooner or later.
Works.
Okay, I think right. I'm unmuted. Good. Yeah. So maybe a number of things. I think where the structures such as the European Union play a role in this and can play a role in this is that both the nature and scale of the problem is beyond the capacity of individual entities to deal with it successfully. So, and I think, you know, we can talk about the European Union, but we can talk about other similar, you know, intergovernmental bodies, or we can even go further down the line and talk about, you know, transboundary collaboration. We can talk about collaboration between, you know, even at the subnational level. So there are a lot of ways in which collaborative structures can really facilitate looking for solutions if there is enough you know, willingness to collaborate on the basis of trust. And one important element that Maria mentioned that I think is important is the reference to values. And in order to build collaborative structures, there has to be some understanding of what those common values are, and as a foundation, you know, that can lead to joint efforts to try and find common solutions. I'm speaking in very general terms now, but we can make this much more specific and even technical. I mean, it is interesting to see how there's a global effort. Let's say, you know, let's stick to the COVID-19 to find a vaccine, for instance, or find cures and so on. It is happening in multiple locations. There's a competition, but perhaps, you know, when a solution is found, there's going to be also some sharing. So that would be important. And structures like the EU can create an energetic trust and create collaborative frameworks where that type of sharing can work and can be scaled up. Now, one additional point where I think, again, structures like the EU can play a role is not just in finding a solution, but initiating processes where we with the crisis. This didn't come out of blue. There's a reason, why this crisis could happen. There were underlying causes that would have to be understood. And if we don't understand them, if we don't understand well, of course, we are bound to fall in the same trap again. So again, it's so I think the diagnosis is just as important, and the shared diagnosis and mechanisms to understand what led us to the problem as finding common solutions. So,
absolutely, thank you. So many good points raised that I have the difficulty of choosing what to pick back on. I hope that we can entertain all these interesting points. Ákos, our previous speakers mentioned sort of this interesting point about values, how values are very important and how values need to change. And there seemed to be a contrast between values and the seeking out of profit. Now, perhaps you have a more direct relationship with the business world. What do you think? Can profits be a simple motivation for businesses to pursue sustainability? Or is there a need for a change in morality and values and ethics, even at the cost of profits sometimes?
I think it's a very, very tough question. As when I turn back just for one sentence to the original challenge that we see today, like as you said, the environment was doing all right, and the economy and society collapsed in a way. Then companies started to turn from environmental initiatives to initiatives to the society to save the employees, the families, save the damage that they can do, and that the crisis can do actually to their operations. So everybody was thinking on how to continue the business, and since businesses were not resilient to this crisis, and they might not be resilient to a similar crisis from other domains like climate change, then it seems like they are at the end of the day they have to drop people and the society because their business case is not proven by these external effects. So I think if someone is thinking how to restart their business, they do not start looking at the profit line at this moment, but rather on a business continuity. If the companies have to survive in a different shape of crisis, which we don't know which one is coming, everybody has a different opinion week by week, then actually you want to secure your corporation. And I think it's for a certain time it might see that it is on the advantage of the environment, but it is not, because companies also stopped spending on what they already successfully spent and overspent, like green energy. Or they will stop spending on energy efficiency. They will stop spending on those commitments that they made. So if we look at from that point of view, then the environment as an asset class is doing a bit okay for this couple of months, but is actually nothing organic. So this is just from the outside world is perceived like dolphins are there everywhere, but really. They will not be there because the change hasn't stopped, like the climate change phenomenon in the background hasn't stopped. So companies thinking on profits, I think they are thinking on values, and in terms of values, more they think of the values of the society and how they can stabilize their supply chains. And yes, if they do this right, then the restart will be not only safe, which people say, but it will be also climate proof, or it will be environmentally proof. So this is something everybody is looking for. If this can happen, This didn't happen in the previous economic crisis, and now I think with the support of the EU and also companies being on a higher alert level in this issue, this might be a bit better. But we are still far from coping with the basic problem of climate change. So this is like a very small and tiny change in the different curves of the global warming or all the others. So I think it will make more damage, this crisis, to what advantages it might seem it has caused in the couple of last months.
Thank you so much. A quick reminder that I would kindly ask you if you want to jump in whenever another speaker is saying something, or you have questions to one another, feel free. I'm only here to facilitate. So I would like this to be a lively discussion as much as possible. All three of you seem to mention the dimension of resiliency. I think this is very interesting, how nation states, how societies, and how companies were caught off guard by this crisis, and that a looming climate crisis could be very similar in this regard. Now, I would like to ask Maria the political dimension of this. So we see that there are climate skeptical parties, governments, sometimes countries have very climate skeptical stance. Why do you think there is this pushback against something that we could feel is a potential danger in society? Do you think this pushback could change because of coronavirus?
That's a good question. And well, first of all, I think we had climate change skeptics already before coronavirus. And unsurprisingly, some of political leaders that were climate skeptics before proved to be corona skeptics as well, not really believing it's a serious health emergency, health threat, and also undermining science in fight with this pandemic. So perhaps it is more of a mindset that questions, the enlightened methods and enlightened reason in managing the world around us. Or is it just a political strategy, a very instrumental approach to mobilize voters and to mobilize the support around you? I'm definitely, as every crisis, this pandemic has also been a test, an ultimate test for political leadership, for integrity, for the values of leadership, for the strength of leadership. And most of political leaders and governments in Europe have actually gained more support and trust than not facing this crisis. However, there is always a threat of instrumentalizing such crises, such situations. In particular, I find this, the outbreak of COVID-19, a particular material or form that could be particularly vulnerable for political instrumentation or some other usage for instant political gains, because it's a very tangible threat. It's a biological threat to all of us. So ordinary citizens can be even more vulnerable to be manipulated, misinformed, or to be driven by instrumentalization of an epidemic, because it's so close to us. It really is a threat to our biological existence. Yeah, I would say next to economic challenges, next to environmental challenges, we also see political challenges, and it's very exciting to see how different leaders are managing and are coping with that crisis, because it is a test of their leadership as well.
All right, thank you. So I think from this a thread we Union has announced its green recovery plan not a long time ago. What is your opinion on this? I would like to ask perhaps László first. How is this effort enough? Is it better than nothing? Is it just political slogans? What are we to think about this recovery plan? I would ask my hosts to unmute László.
Okay, I fell victim to the same problems again. Well, you know, if you know, the answer to your question, I think, is that it depends on our frame of reference. If my frame of reference is narrowly speaking this crisis, politically speaking, in terms of sectoral policies, if that's my frame of reference, then of course this recovery fund is a product of a political discourse that is aiming to in the present, that is aiming to deal with this situation on a relatively short-term basis, and wants to produce results. Well, you know, I mean, politics, the time frame is it is what it is. It's you know, it's from election to election. So that's one set of perspective. So it's reasonably short term. There are, of course, in the recovery fund elements of that are, I would say, in sync with this longer term perspective, that we don't only have a COVID crisis, we also have other crises. And in fact, the COVID crisis is in part a result of other crises that are potentially much bigger. So if I broaden this frame of reference, and I think Ákos already alluded to that, and I really fully support that, I mean, at the moment, I don't think there isn't enough of an indication that the structural changes that are really needed to start attacking some of the much bigger, much more serious issues. You mentioned climate change. That's only one of them. We have issues with, you know, loss of life. We have issues with chemicals. We have issues with, I mean, just in the environment domain. We also have, of course, many social problems. But it's a massive system of problems that require a broadened perspective, and I think social dialogue on the basis of people's experience and a much longer time perspective. And so I'm not sure we are having those discussions. And the same way as after 2008, after a financial crisis, the economy fell back to where it was before. Maybe this is more. I think this is more serious. But I don't yet see, even despite the rhetoric, that these deeper structural changes would really start taking place.
Yeah.
Thank you. Pessimistic takes are very welcome in this conversation.
And realistic.
Yes, realistic rather. And I would quickly remind our audience that they can ask our speakers questions in the chat box, or they can raise their hands if they have a very urgent question. Ákos, László mentioned the lack of deep structural change, and you also seem to alluded to this. Can you name a few examples of how a structurally different economy would work? How a structurally different business would work in a way that is sustainable in all those dimensions that László mentioned, so not just climate change.
Yes, so I think it's a very tough question again, because when you look at businesses who were successful in sustainability, like looking at the value and having this in their core value, I think they didn't change. I mean, it's a credibility issue for them. also, as well as it's in their values. So if we look at those who did this right before, then they are following the same path. There is no change. The change was only that another part of the sustainability matrix was actually asking for help, which was, to my best understanding, the society part, because from economical point of view, it was more dominated everywhere by central governments to support the sectors that needed support. Also, some companies have changed their way of business model. Like, people started to have digitalized ways of communicating, working, selling. So all this thing has changed, which we cannot say it's good for the whole sustainability point of view. But people got their food delivered, and other basic needs were actually fulfilled. And in this case, what we saw is that companies had to change this within matters of days or weeks. The operation model that they ran, like, people started to sell on the internet. People tried before, but with this crisis, it was actually getting through by different reasons, that the traditional grocery sales in stores and the people and how they could visit the stores was not actually fulfilling the way it was delivered up until now to the stores. So those vegetables have to be delivered day by day and consumed day by day. That's when they keep fresh, and that's when you feel you buy something fresh. And so we saw two types of companies: one that stayed very intact in terms of its sustainability values, and other companies and other smaller firms, they had to change their operation model right away, and that operation model has to be followed up by sustainable measures, because it is not proven that they are better than as of they operated before.
Thank you.
And I think in the green recovery, if I can add one sentence, to the green recovery, I think it's again a bit less than it would be needed. Of course, this is only the action of the EU and the funding what the EU is committed to put into the green economy after this crisis. But in terms of the sentiment that should be there from the market, I think this is only the central government-based funding that could be there for the member states, and this is also very much loan-based. If you check those instruments that are coming out, so it's a question whether this could be leveraged, and this would be a good solution for the EU to actually ask for a credit on the green recovery, rather than asking another credit on keeping the fossil world running. So we will see, but that one trillion euro that the climate bank, the European Investment Bank, would want to create here, it's actually still not enough for this problem if it's only in 10 years of time.
Thank you. We have a couple questions from our audience, but I would quickly like to continue a point that Ákos raised, which I think is very interesting, about digitalization and perhaps automatization of our economy. Now, we saw that a lot of companies have used this hiatus as an opportunity to either digitalize some of their workplaces, or sometimes even start to automatize some jobs. And there seems to be an anxiety. There were a couple articles that mentioned that this could either lead to unemployment or make it harder for people that are not digitally literate to take part in the workforce. Maria, what do you think of this? Is this a danger of this change that we're going through? Is this necessary with going green, or is this something that we can avoid or should avoid? What is your take?
My take is that we know it from our history that every technological development has brought a change to the way we live and work. And if we think about the first wave of industrialization a few centuries ago, it also brought a gigantic structural change within societies. emergence of new classes of working class, for example, and turn from rural economies to industrialized economies. And not without a reason, these processes of digitization, automatization are called the fourth industrial revolution, if not the fifth, right? So I guess we are facing another leap and technological leap that will inevitably have socioeconomic consequences and even perhaps cultural. The fact that we are meeting now and doing a conference and discussing topics digitally already shows how much impact and how much opportunities digitization gives us in our life, with certain costs that we meet only via the cable and not face to face, right? But back to your question, okay, we can take it for granted, be it energy transition or digital revolution. Both of them will have significant impacts on societies, on our economies, and they most probably will change the structure of employment. Some professions will disappear because they cannot be digitized. Some professions will disappear because they don't belong to carbon-based economy. But in that void, new professions will be created. And the trick is to find ways to make a transition not only just and not only least painful for those affected, but also a sustainable transition. And you know, I'm from Poland, you guys are from Hungary. We remember the years of transformation, already a political change in our region has brought opportunities to some who jumped on that train and developed their businesses and developed their careers in new capitalist economy and free market. And it brought distortion to people who, well, I don't know, were employed in state-owned companies and coal mines and heavy industry and so on. So I can imagine there might be resistance and there might be fear and there might be insecurity about the future based on experiences even the generation of our parents have had because of structural change. But changes are inevitable, and it's in the hands of politicians and in the hands of authorities, and to some extent in the hands of the society and institutions that represent collective interests, like trade unions or organizations of employers, to come to a point when you make this transition not only sustainable, but also cushion the costs and cushion the risks and cushion the negative consequences it can have. So inevitably, or well, what's inevitable? Actually, COVID showed us that we can doubt far more than we thought. But I think the energy transition and digitization are mega trends that once unleashed will continue. And instead of resisting them, it's perhaps better to get a grip and come to terms with it and try to follow. But we have to follow in a smart way, not to leave people behind, not to create poverty, not to create social exclusion, not to kill regions that are monocultured, that live of coal or live of, I don't know, hospitality, for example, which is undigitalizable, so to speak. Some services are impossible to be delivered by robots or other machines. So transformation, yes, but a smart one.
Absolutely, thank you. We have a question from our audience, from Tamara, and it's a very long and complex question. László, do you mean to say something?
Yes, if I
Please.
can just pick up on
absolutely, go ahead. Yeah.
On previous points that were made by Maria, because I think your point about making this a smart transition is a really interesting one, and the reason I'm saying this is that if the question was about technology and automation and AI and that sort of thing, and And I'm conflicted. I'm a little schizophrenic in the sense that I'm a technophile at one level, but I'm also a sustainability oriented person on the other. And how do you reconcile these two sides is really tricky. And I think what we have to realize is that we live in a very complex adaptive system, and in essence, I think we are running actually an uncontrolled experiment. In the sense, the technologies are coming fast. They are coming fast and furious. They are coming with a lot of energy. They are new. We don't understand even how the present system works sometimes. And now we throw new technologies at it, which we feel, they have attractive elements, but they also have risks that we don't have enough knowledge. So where am I going with this argument? I guess where I'm going with this is that I think if we just understand that this is an uncontrolled experiment, that's already a good step, because then that makes us humble, and we realize that we have to approach this in a way of social learning, in a sense. We are experimenting, and when we socially, at the small level or regional level, as you said, what do we do with our regions that are so dependent on coal or heavy industry and so on? That we run this in a way that we don't make big mistakes. When we introduce new technologies, when we introduce new sets of policies, where we don't fully understand how they work, because the system is too complex, then we build in capacities to take a step back. And the point was made also before about resilience. So, and the resilient system has this ability to take a step back, but also sort of pull back and reorganize and try something else. So I feel that this, I'm speaking in abstract terms at a macro scale, but I think this line of thinking about, making this transition, and the transition idea is very important, smart and learning and resilient, I think is very important. And it does include the technology element, but it includes policies and many other factors. So just wanted to pick up on that.
Well, this is a very good point. This is a very good point.
Can I jump in quickly?
Sure,
and thank
sure,
you, László, for this point. It's a really very good, very interesting remark you made on the level of policies. But unfortunately, it's always politics that also kicks in. That is not always, in line with this long-term perspective of learning and understanding. Of course, if you want to be elected every 4 years in the 4 years term, that might be a complete opposition to taking a very reasonable and slow and approach to innovations or to transitions. You might avoid the transition, or in fact kick in with a kind of brutal transition, serving the interests of only one group and not necessarily the other. So just a remark on how complex the whole situation is. It's not only about understanding the technologies and their impact on societies, but also taking the context and the short-term interests of various actors into consideration before we talk about the long-term perspective, right?
Yep. Good point.
Ákos, what is your point about this conversation? I think some very interesting points have been mentioned about this optionality, perhaps not knowing what institutional change will bring about exactly, and the complexity of the situation. Do you think we're doing good at that? How could we do better, perhaps, or is it something important?
I mean, there are different institutional changes that I think we will observe, and one is the everyday politics, where we see that the issue of the green economy is coming up, and it's not really dependent on what we live today. It's a bit dependent, of course, because the systems are not fully resilient to such crises. So for that reason, people have an appetite on trying something else, some more sustainable models. but the other is also the generations that are growing up and are going to vote. They are demanding green policies to be more on place for the benefit of having more resilient economies and better working society. So I think that's like one type of change. And if you look at the corporates, like there are new standards already out for sustainability governance, and not many is becoming completely into economies, where the rule is like you need to have someone responsible for guiding that part of the business that is related to climate change or sustainability. You need to report about it. You need to have action plans. You need to track progress. You need to show all this to your consumers, to your investors. So that type of appetite from investor communities and the other stakeholder communities is already there, but it's just gonna be, I think, stronger and stronger to demand that information. And it's demanded because people want to mitigate the risk, any type of risk that is there. So I think, and I'm not a professional on viruses, but if you think of having, let's say, a human-induced type of disease and the economic shutdown, that I think we could name this situation like that, then what if during the summer in Europe, the climate change caused different viruses are going to pick up? So where are we going to end up with that world where as I think Maria said it, we have a biological threat on us, and I had this belief a couple of years ago also, that once it gets to our life, to our biology, that will be the point when we take things seriously. And you can see this in this crisis. It happens. Same is with climate change. It's unfortunately sometimes not in all of its impact, but in many cases it's a bit of a longer process and less drastic, like we live it now. So companies tend to get back to their flexible lives, but luckily there are standards and there are leaders. If you look at the cases, and this is about governance again, of Canada, or you look at the German bailout plan, you look at the Austrian one, you look at the Swiss regulation on the airplane tickets, how much they should cost so that they cover the sustainability costs. These countries are trialing such bailout that is changing them and putting them on the track of sustainable economies. So I think it's getting through both the politics and both on a company level. And if you see those who were the winners actually of this last 4 or 5 months, those companies who became digital, they have an advantage now to go forward with their model of operation, but it's not always sustainable. So I don't know if we are using different programs to call each other. Are those coal power plants behind us, or are these renewables? Because from some technical companies, we know that they operate almost 100% renewables, but we are not sure it's everybody already there. So I think governance is in that sense is changing both in member states, both at the EU level. It's very strong in this direction. And companies have to follow it if not for any other reason, but the reason that the EU will fund those and will loan those that are green. Then it's something that there is a time for being green, because it will be paid off at the end of the day, and the EU tries to cover that and the year fence that with carbon border tax and other type of economic tools, so that we are not getting the EU and hopefully spreading it also beyond that.
Thank you. I think it's time for us to transition to our audience questions. We have some great questions, and thank you so much. And you can keep them coming. And also don't forget to raise your hand if you feel like there's something that you need to say immediately. And so let's look at, I hope you can see the chat box. And so Tamara has a quite a long question about capitalism. And if I understand correctly, the essence of the question is how much sustainability is compatible with capitalism. Now, this is the billion-dollar question, of course. Another one. Does any of you feel like they know the answer or have some sort of answer for us? László, please.
I can chip in at least from one point of view, and it's probably not the answer that Tamara was expecting, but a fundamental aspect of this question is what are the types of capitals that capitalism is actually working with, and of course in the classical or neoclassical sense, it's been almost exclusively financial capital, and if we broaden again that framework from the sustainability perspective, then what we know, this is just conceptually, there's also social and natural capital, and of course the problem is that as much as those are part of our realities, they are not accounted for. So we have in that sense, we have a problem with a capitalistic system that is not recognizing really fundamental realities of the world that are essential for society to function as healthy and as a whole. Now, just to give you one example, and I'll stop. Of course, this is not a new recognition. I mean, there's been a lot of work already happening on trying to broaden this framework. And in Canada, we've done one, I think, prominent initiative, the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, which was trying to instrumentalize an alternative thinking about how you look at your society when you look at it not only through financial accounting, which we should do, by the way, that's no problem with that, but also add other elements to it that are, broadly speaking, the social and natural capital, and that gives you a picture of the whole. Like, we don't have those systems sort of operationalized, so that is a fundamental challenge.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maria, you seemed concerned.
Yeah, I was thinking about it to chip in, and it's actually, I would continue on László's thought on that global question about sustainability, because the point of view depends on where you sit. And I sometimes have an idea, it's very easy to talk about sustainability from the perspective of the global north when you can afford sustainability. Ecological products or environmentally neutral products are often more expensive. Environmentally neutral technologies are more expensive because new technologies tend to be more expensive in general before they get popularized and are in use universally. So it's, I think it's a kind of comfortable conversation we are having, in the sense of living in developed countries that can already start that discussion and introduce the measures to combat climate change, and outsource all the dirty parts of their production chains to the global south, to the poorer countries, which are dependent economically on this kind of investments. And I'm thinking about the garment industry, what we are buying now in shopping malls in Europe, North America, or whatever in the Western Hemisphere, in what conditions it's being produced. So our mobile phones, right? They are, okay, I'm not technologically advanced to tell you what exactly is the mobile phone, but there are elements of very rare minerals and so on, which are excavated in horrible conditions elsewhere in Africa. So if we're talking about sustainability, or the other way around, often the conversation about sustainability and protection of climate happens in the reality of the Western developed world. And we we have a great feeling of doing great, you know, not eating meat or using a bike. But globally, we have to change the economy globally, and we have to change the inequalities happening globally. And we also have to not to be hypocrites in basically sweeping out the dirt to other countries and other continents from our backyard, so to speak. So this has to do with capitalist system, definitely, but it also has to do with, again, values, more solidarity and more global thinking and understanding sustainability as a structural, necessary systemic structural change, not only, you know, a label. And I don't want to undermine the efforts that companies are undertaking to meet sustainable goals, but unless there won't be a sanction for unsustainable production or breaking the laws, the environmental laws, and not abiding them, at that long we won't really be able to make a global change and really move along the lines to avoid climate change, or at least slow it down. So yeah, that was my intervention on thinking globally, not only locally.
I would quickly ask Ákos about this, because I seem to remember that in your conversation with us, this came up very briefly, how the EU is not the worst offender when it comes to climate goals, and whether the EU should pursue a more universalist approach to its climate policy. If so, then at the cost perhaps of losing competitiveness. And there's also the problem of economic growth in developing nations that are much more dependent on very often polluting industries. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think if I look at the models, how the European Union goals and targets supported developing countries, I think that there is a lot of link. I mean, we as Europeans, we have also offsetted or put our dirty industrial sites out of the EU. So it's like one of the impacts we had. At the same time, when we look at the period of the Kyoto Protocol, when there was a potential possibility to develop projects in the developing country worlds, which were reducing emissions and doing also socio-economic benefits to the people, then it was actually the European Union which was triggering this type of changes, and there was a technology export from the EU in the domain of reducing CO2 to these developing countries. So I think it's not against the EU's economic competitiveness as a whole to have exportable goods and products in the, I don't know, I'm saying now, hydrogen economy or biomethane or all different type of renewables. So that was very successful with, for example, the biogas technologies in the last period of this Kyoto Protocol time, when all of a sudden, after a couple of years, Germany became exporter of those technologies to everywhere in the world. So the EU is creating markets by these moves, and I think there is a competition sometimes, but sometimes there isn't with the US on this. But it's not based on the green policies that would be existing in the US for the same domain, but it's rather the economic power that the US has all around the world on its economy. So the EU is a kind of this policy guy in the room who's pushing things to the high end. I mean, like if you check the Paris Agreement, there is there became a sentence on the net zero 2050 target, like eliminating emission. That was something that the EU found out to be there. It was nobody else that was pushing that hard to say an end date to decarbonize the continent, and then decarbonize others, of course, because it's not for the EU there, but it's for the overall target of the Paris Agreement. So I think it's not. This is of course a race for competitiveness. But if someone looks at carefully how we are overusing the natural resources on Earth and all the different risks that we have, then I think this this is a wise thing to look at sustainable issues as risks, try to cover it, try to mitigate it, and have technologies that are resilient to this type of risk, and make a living out of helping this to be an exportable good. So of course, member states differ from one to the other, how far and how developed they are in this. But at the end of the day, this could be a kind of common business sense of the EU if that exists.
Would any of you like to follow up?
Pardon?
Well,
No,
okay,
yeah,
László.
maybe I would just chip in. I agree with Ákos, and I think the risk framework is very very useful, practically useful, and interesting. One of the issues that I've been interested in from this perspective is the role, particularly of the insurance sector, and you mentioned climate risk and so on, and of course now we can add health risk and pandemic risk and that sort of thing. Of course, these combine; they don't come in isolation, and what I'm actually wondering is that if we continue going down this path of either sort of risks that we realize they are there only once they become a real problem, or risks that we know about that we know they are large, but we can't stop them simply because the inertia behind them is too big. And I think the climate risk is one of those. You know, what will that do to the functioning of the economy, and would that force at some point changes? Because I mean, you know, we can get to a point where you know, any sort of major infrastructure development becomes simply uninsurable because the risk is too high. I've done work on large-scale infrastructure in Southern Africa, and we know that you know, this is becoming an impediment to investment. And I wonder if that, you know, that becomes a lever for positive change, that we want to, you know, have a better understanding of risk, multidimensional risk, and develop strategies to both understand risk better and develop instruments and strategies at macro and micro scale to manage risk. So I think risk is really quite central.
Thank you. We have two questions on intergovernmental bodies, and Ákos has already chipped in the conversation in the chat. So we have this question from 888999, whom I thank for the question, that I would like to read out to you. Do you see the importance of the interdependency between the nations of underdeveloped economies on the developed economies? How would it increase amid COVID-19? And if it would increase, what steps would you want intergovernmental bodies to take up as an action plan? I think this connects a little bit to some of the criticism that arose during COVID of globalization. Many people said that these highly interconnected and highly complex value chains are a point of risk for countries. And of course, they contribute to polluting the environment as well. What do you think about this? Where should we go in this regard? If any of you would like to join.
I think I can address that very simply. Like the Paris Agreement is there because developed and developing countries managed to agree on how they swap their issues and challenges with each other, which was having a commitment by those who are growing in a rapid pace, and therefore it's not. It matters a lot whether they start a sustainable track or they start a fossil fuel track. So those countries all signed up to the agreement because from the other side there was a commitment on funding this transition for them. So I would put that question in my word of this climate change negotiations, would this be harmed by this crisis? I mean, this agreement, this concert of action that was there, and it's only the US that tries to pull out from this again, as it was in the past, but the rest of the countries are staying imminent. And this year in Glasgow in November, there should be some progress on how the markets will be created, which markets will be the platform for these developing countries to receive technologies, and it would be a trackable, measurable, verifiable way for reducing emissions. So that's something I'm watching for. And the other that I put here in the notes, like the International Energy Agency was also coming out with a big plan to try to leverage now and start a more renewable world, the energy technology access of countries. So that's interesting to check again how it can trigger this transition.
Thank you. Would any of you like to join about the dependency between developing and developed nations and the role of intergovernmental bodies in this regard? No? So we have a second question from Tamara. Tamara, thank you so much for being active. She is asking about e-waste and waste related to technology and how it's something that may be getting worse. Of course, we're using more technology, and of course, the implicit assumption is that technology is something that will help us on the road to sustainability. But are there any problems with this? Would any of you like to comment?
Well, of course, maybe I can comment briefly,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure others too. Of course, this is a big topic, and it is also quite linked to the North-South issue. I mean, this was one of the prominent ways in which we were externalizing our problems in the North, and just how big a problem it is, I think, is quite interestingly illustrated by the decision of China, and then some other Southeast Asian nations to ban the import of foreign waste. I mean, we could see that over the last 2-3 years as they progressively introduced legislation that suddenly, shut down this waste supply chains. That created major, backup in the sending countries that frantically started looking for other markets where they can, So, of course, these are not problems I think that we can solve quickly, and the solution is probably, I mean, it's kind of as far as demand. Do you really need yet another cell phone when you probably don't? How do we design products? I think the whole sort of circular economy thinking as a concept is providing a broad framework about how to deal with this. And I think we are up to something, in that discourse, but I think we are at the moment we are still quite far from having solutions. I'm guessing that because of COVID, if you look at the consumption production statistics, and we are seeing probably a drop in manufacturing and consumption. So that will likely translate into some, I suspect, temporary reduction in some of these waste streams. But I'm not convinced that this is going to hold on for a long time. We do need better structural changes.
Thank you. This ties back to what Maria opened the conversation with about values, about consumption that should be more long-term, and of course production that should satisfy this demand for long-term products. Maria, do you think that COVID-19, I think we all restricted our consumption a little bit, and do you think this could be a step forward in this regard, that people perhaps now value more long-term products or less immediate products?
One could, I'll answer that question in an anecdotal way. First of all, looking at what people started doing at home when they were locked down because of quarantine and so on, and started refurbishing and renewing or doing whatever they had to do or ever wanted to do at home. perhaps that's, you know, rediscovering a forgotten art of using the products that we're using longer and fixing them and not throwing them away just because they're broken. That's of course an anecdote, but you know, after the lockdown and after everything was closed, at least in Germany where I live, we had a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks of a complete lockdown. When I saw in the media reports on the lines on the first day IKEA opened, for example, suddenly everybody went to IKEA, or people were really waiting in the line to markets offering building products, and I mean not, you know, companies that do construction, but individual customers. And so I'm kind of I'm not sure if we've learned, we as a whole, as a society, have learned to constrain our consumption needs and vagaries, and but maybe we did. Maybe we saw, some of us perhaps maybe saw that things that we before in the pre-COVID era considered absolutely necessary are not that crucial for our existence. So that brings me to my point about crisis as any crisis as a moment of a test, but also a catalyst for change. And maybe this in a way enforced change or enforced situation that we are facing, maybe it in fact brings some positive outcomes and consequences for the way we live and how do we function. Of course, I'm saying that from a very comfortable and privileged perspective of a person who did not lose her job, went without a problem into home office, and can do home office because I have internet and a good laptop and a flat that allows me to work in silence and in peace. I'm wondering how other members of our societies, people from other socioeconomic strata, if they would share my privileged view on that. Probably lives of some people because of COVID have worsened and not improved as mine, for example, right?
Thank you. I'm looking at my notes, and there was one question that is not from the audience, but I think it's worth entertaining by the end. So when the European Union started working on its green taxonomy of sustainable business activities and investments, it turned out that this task was performed by BlackRock, the asset manager, and there was a minor outcry about this. There were a few pieces that I've read on the Financial Times, on the Guardian. Some of my friends were very concerned, and I think this raises an interesting question of how we relate to large companies and how they shape our sustainable future. Ákos, what do you think about this? I mean, Deloitte is not a direct competitor of BlackRock, so I think it's I can ask you about the Commission's decision of consulting with BlackRock. Do you think this is something that we shouldn't do, or do you understand people's concerns about this?
You know, it's a very interesting question, because the EU taxonomy has just been approved, like I think a week ago. So those documentations that try to set the milestone for both the industry, which is looking for funding, and also the financing industry that tries to become more green, and that finance the green transition, they got a matrix that is actually out there to be discussed and applied. And by that end, I think this is the most important part that could happen. Sorry, my smaller kid is just rearranging the room. But otherwise, yeah. So I think I can't comment on the BlackRock part of this question. But what I can comment on that we see this coming up in the agenda of different central banks, And at the end of the day, it's all going to outline the logic of a CFO, which CFO is there to understand exactly what it's financing and understand whether it's sustainable or not. And I think on that end, this material is a good food for thought. We should see how much this will be really applied, and how much it will be really ending up on influencing financial decisions. So I think that is something, an achievement, but it's not over yet. There will be part of this sustainable finance packages be approved later this year. So I can't judge it at this moment. There are companies already doing this. There are institutions, FSI institutions already divesting from different assets. So I think this is a regulation that would bring everybody on the same level of understanding what is sustainable and what is not. And if we look at the biggest ticket here in the room, the EIB to transform to a green and or carbon bank, then actually that money has to be deployed by such metrics. And I think it's a great achievement that we are there to discuss this with the bankers at the end of the day, or with the investment community, how they want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Would any of you like to follow up on what Ákos just said?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll chip
Please.
in briefly. You know, I think it's important actually to engage with business, because the problems we have are huge, and we have to take the solutions to scale, and business has scale in many regards. So I don't think there is really a way to get around that. But it's very important how that is done. So, you know, again, I don't know the details of the BlackRock deal and their role, but is there a clear and how is private and public interest reconciled? You know, businesses usually, when they play a role for their own good first and foremost. But there's also such a thing as, you know, corporate social responsibility. Well, we have these, you know, technical terms, corporate social responsibility. So how do we align those two in a transparent way? I think those are very important questions. I mean, this conversation also goes back to the previous point about, you know, problems with capitalism. And I said, well, you know, problem is that we have many more types of capital than capitalism recognizes, and the same is true for companies themselves. So how do we sort of enlarge the perspective of companies so they understand the broader set of realities that they are playing in? And yeah, so I don't think there's a simple answer to this question, but I think we do need to engage business in the right way.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and Emmanuel, who gave us his name, is asking us, what impacts have you seen in the performance of developed and developing countries in terms of their contribution towards meeting SDGs by 2030? Do you think that there has been a considerable backslide, which makes it difficult now to meet the SDGs by 2030? Do you think it's still achievable? Thank you, Emmanuel, for your question. Maria, what do you think? Was there any change in
I'll pass on that. I'm not the right question to ask, and I have my golden and pretty rare rule not to speak on topics I don't have enough information. So I'll happily listen to the other two speakers. What's their take on that?
What is your take on that, other two speakers?
Ákos, you want to go first?
It's possible that it's a complex question, one that perhaps we don't have time right now to sufficiently analyze.
Well, you know, I mean, I can speak to that to some extent. I mean, you know, we've done the report on the.
Ákos is muted.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes. Yes.
Maybe I don't want to take the floor from Ákos. If
No,
he wants
please
to
go ahead until we
contribution.
resolve Ákos's microphone. I think absolutely. You can.
Yeah. I guess, you know, maybe I mean, just a small anecdote. We did a report for UNEP in around 2000 and maybe 12 or so, when the MDGs were finishing on the performance of MDG 7. That's the environmental MDG, and up to that point, in the entire life cycle of the MDGs, there hasn't been a consistent, sort of diagnosis on all countries, on all MDG 7 indicators, like how is everybody doing? So there was no effort put into that diagnosis until the very end of the process. I think on the SDGs, there's a little better effort. There is the reporting system is, and I played a role in SDG negotiations and stuff. I think there are better mechanisms. We better understand the importance of this reporting and verification and transparency, but it's done in great diversity in different countries. I think it's probably too early to tell how to provide a satisfactory answer to this question. And there is no one question, in fact, because there are certain areas, of course, where progress is being made in developing countries, but it will vary from SDG to SDG. And we simply don't, you know, there are still 10 more years. We have to have these monitoring systems in place. And the other thing is that when we do see some progress on the SDGs, there is still a question, is this attributed to something that's specifically done in that country to progress those SDGs, or it just happens? Like right now, you know, as a result of COVID-19, air quality in many large cities significantly improved. If you look at the SDGs, there's going to be probably a goal and target somewhere to say that we should improve air quality in big cities. But there was nothing that said that, you know, we should do that by, you know, exposing ourselves to a global pandemic. So it's you know, so we have to do these things in a purposeful way and take advantage of these accidents that happened right now. But there is a need more systematic strategy development and implementation. Anyway.
Thank you so much. I hope we haven't lost Ákos permanently.
No. It's I'm here. Sorry, I just didn't find for some reason the right button to push. Yeah, it's whether and how they will be met. I think there is still a long track to go. I would just jump to biodiversity, where I think we had a report last year out which said that is really in bad shape. So the biodiversity related SDGs, because there are more of them, they are at huge risk and harm. So if you look at the different SDGs, and this is more of a political landscape where also governments and companies could opt for selecting which they think is more important for them, I would think that there might be some delay, and I'm less optimistic on whether they would be met. If you just look at the climate action part, which is there again to be fulfilled, we are facing week by week new researches that are telling us that our observations are underestimated, and this is only just one of the SDGs. If you look at the partnership part, where you think governments and companies would cooperate, showing whether this is possible if the mankind has a big issue and has to solve it together. So I'm not that optimistic. I hope I'm not right, and this will change. But right now there were only bad news. I was.
I lost you for a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Okay, I'm sorry. Please, Ákos,
Okay.
if you haven't finished your sentence, please finish. I lost you for a second there.
Okay, yeah, I finished. Okay, that's
Perfect.
just because
Perfect.
my internet connection is not good. My computer set, so
Oh no, it's fine.
yeah,
It's,
I'm not optimistic about the UN targets at this moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid that we've run out of time, and I would ask you to, if you have any closing remarks, quickly, then please mention these. And while we do that, I would kindly invite all of you, audience and speakers included, to the Budapest Sustainability Exchange, which we will have on September 23rd and 24th. Now, I'm not officially part of B4SDG, but I can guarantee you that these guys are absolutely great at organizing conferences. They are fantastic events where you can meet, network, and get to know more about sustainability. And so we're looking forward to your participation. Thank you, guests, for being here. I think it was a great conversation. It was great to have you. And we're hoping to have you in the future as well.
Thank you very much for having us. And thank you for great questions and great conversation.
Yeah.
It was really great. Thank you.
Good conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you. And good questions from the audience.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
And good facilitation.
Thank you.
Good facilitation, Bálint. Exactly. You said it was your first and you did really well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's very kind.
Right. Bye, guys.
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good evening.